In a dim, half-lit bar on a bustling space station, an apparently casual act of violence, an alien Valari soldier slapping a human boy, shifts the atmosphere from background murmur to complete, charged silence. The slap, delivered with one of the Valari's four-jointed arms, snaps the boy's head and sends him against his father, and the bar's ambient noises, the clink of glassware, the shuffle of cards, the low murmur of alien tongues, abruptly stop. Sensory details anchor the setting: the smell of fried algae and synthetic hops, a groaning fan, the sheen of segmented silver-blue armor under yellowed lights. The Valari's physical dominance is emphasized: tall, crested, armored, and wearing the polished sigil of the Valari Guard, a symbol that marks him as both veteran and bully. The father, a lean, world-weary spacer in plain clothes, steadies his son with a calm hand. The boy's face is flushed and trembling but not overtly terrified. His gaze remains fixed on the soldier, who grins with contempt. When the soldier taunts, framing his behavior as a lesson in respect toward primitive mammals, some patrons laugh nervously, unsure whether safety permits silence. The father lowers himself to his son's level and checks him with a practiced intimacy. His voice is steady and controlled, carrying the low rumble of someone who refuses to show panic. After the boy nods, the father straightens and addresses the Valari with a quiet, measured politeness, quoting a Midwestern proverb: "You don't lay a hand on another man's kid unless you're ready to bury your own." The verbal exchange ratchets the tension. The Valari asks if the father's words are a threat. The father calls it a proverb and meets the soldier's insignia with a glance that says he knows what that symbol represents. Conversation dies across the bar as onlookers freeze. A Rin merchant halts mid-bite, an insectoid bartender calculates the damage a fight would cost him, and the room becomes a tableau of suppressed reaction. The Valari asserts territorial dominance, claiming the station, the bar, and everyone in it, trying to turn the moment into an assertion of power. Then the scene pivots in an economy of motion. The father's response is almost casual but brutally final. With what appears to be a lazy movement, he cups the soldier's helm-like crest and crushes it. A wet, rupturing sound, a flicker of wide eyes, and the soldier collapses. The bar is stunned into silence. The drop of liquid is suddenly loud. The father wipes his hand as if cleaning a spill, bends to his son, and instructs him to finish his drink. The boy complies, a small, ritual action that contrasts sharply with the violence that just occurred. As the father prepares to leave, his composure remains uncanny, casual, almost diner-like, while his eyes sweep the room one last time, counting rather than threatening. Other patrons begin to react. Whispers, nervous movement toward security, the Valari companions shifting their grips on weapons. A crystalline lumen diplomat's dry remark, "And they tell us humans are a peaceful people," underscores the irony. The pair exit into a dim corridor as the station seems to hold its breath. Distant boots signal that response is coming. The killing reads less like a fit of rage than the opening move in a larger, nameless conflict. A private code of protection colliding with institutional arrogance, with everyone present suddenly aware that this moment will ripple far beyond the bar. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Cosmic Conquerors channel. Before we start, I hope you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so that you receive all the new content, and also share the story with your friends so it reaches as many people as possible. And if you have a story, write it in the comments. Maybe we'll choose one to narrate in the next video. Let's start the story. Pay attention, because there's a small detail that might change your entire perspective and awareness of life. The father didn't answer the diplomat. Instead, he collected his satchel from the floor, slung it over one shoulder, and stood with the casual posture of someone leaving a diner after paying the bill. But his eyes swept the room once more, not in warning, just counting. The bartender began to move at last, skittering toward the door to call station security. A group of amphibian traders whispered among themselves, their slick heads bobbing nervously. The only sound from the Valari soldiers' companions was the soft scrape of armor shifting as they adjusted their grips on their weapons, unsure whether to avenge the insult or let the moment pass. The boy finished his drink, set the empty glass on the counter, and swung his legs off the stool. "Are we in trouble?" he asked quietly. The father looked down at him and gave the kind of smile that didn't quite travel to his eyes. "Not yet." They stepped toward the exit. The hum of the station's ventilation suddenly louder, like the place itself was holding its breath. Outside the door's threshold, the corridor lights were dimmed to night cycle, throwing their shadows long and sharp against the brushed metal walls. Behind them, boots hit the floor in quick succession. 3, maybe 4 sets. The father didn't turn around. His right hand, the the one that had ended a decorated Valari's life in less than 2 seconds, flexed once before relaxing at his side. The boy's small fingers curled into his left hand, and together they kept walking until the shadows from the bar were swallowed by the corridor's curve. Somewhere far down the hall, the heavy doors of the station security bay clanged open. And in that instant, everyone on that level, patrons, barkeep, soldiers, understood that what had just happened was not an accident, not a burst of temper, but the opening move in something they didn't yet have a name for. What do you think? Was this just a dad protecting his kid, or something more? Station security arrived like a storm bottled in boots and armor. Their movements a rehearsed blend of intimidation and efficiency. For species, 6 sets of eyes, weapons held low but not idle. The corridor's recycled air smelled faintly of metal polish and something sharp, ozone from their stun lances. The father didn't resist when they stepped in around him, their formation precise, like a living cage. His son's hand was still in his, small and steady despite the tightening ring of bodies. "You'll come with us," said the lead officer, a chitin-plated insectoid whose mandibles clicked between syllables. "There will be questions." The father's tone was almost cordial. "Of course, I'd be disappointed if there weren't." 2 guards peeled the boy away toward a side corridor, guiding him toward what they called a caretaker unit. The boy looked back once, and the father met his gaze with a calm nod, an unspoken signal that things were under control, at least for now. They walked him through a series of dim corridors until the noise of the main station was nothing but a distant hum. The interrogation room was a square of brushed steel and bad lighting. There was no mirror, only a wall panel that pulsed faintly with unseen machinery. He sat when they told him to sit, leaning back as if settling into an old porch chair. The security chief took the opposite seat, resting his upper arms on the table and letting his lower limbs fidget with a datapad. His black eyes were unblinking, his voice dry. "You killed a decorated Valari guard in cold blood. That's an execution offense in this jurisdiction." The father tilted his head slightly, as though weighing the accusation for fairness. "Decorated for what?" The chief hesitated a fraction too long, and the father smiled faintly, as if the pause confirmed something. "Where I come from," he said, "decorations mean you've done something admirable. Not everyone defines that the same way." The chief ignored the bait. "Your presence here is already unusual. No registered trade cargo, no clear employer." "Family trip," the father said, his voice warm with false transparency. "Thought the boy should see the galaxy before he gets too tall to think I know everything." "Interesting choice of bar for a family outing." "Bars are where you learn the truth about a place," he replied. "Diplomats polish words. Working people just spit them out." The chief's mandibles clicked, perhaps in irritation, perhaps in thought. "You speak as if you've been here before." "I've been a lot of places." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the steel, his gaze steady. "Question is, have you been to mine?" It wasn't a threat, not outright, but it hung in the space between them like the smell of oil before a fire catches. In the caretaker lounge, the boy sat on a low couch, swinging his legs. The caretaker, a soft-skinned Avon with pale blue feathers, offered him a nutrient drink, which he accepted politely. Between sips, he began talking about baseball. The Avon didn't know the game, but the boy explained patiently, using bottle caps and snack wrappers to mark bases and players. He mentioned his father had taught him to keep his eyes on the ball, not the pitcher, because the pitcher would try to trick you. The caretaker laughed, thinking it a charming analogy for life. He didn't notice the boy glancing now and then at the security staff posted nearby, tracking their pacing as if counting heartbeats. "This kid's pretty sharp, huh? What do you think he's really doing?" Back in the interrogation room, the chief pressed on. "The Valari guard is demanding custody. We may have no choice but to comply." The father nodded almost amicably. "You'll find choices are rarely as narrow as they look." The chief tapped a claw against the table. "Are you threatening this station?" "Threatening?" The father's brows rose in mild surprise. "No, I'm reminding you that the ripples from one stone thrown in the wrong pond can drown things you didn't even know could swim." The chief sat back, studying him with the slow attention of a predator, unsure if the thing in front of it was prey or something worse. "Your people have a reputation. We've earned it." Elsewhere in the station's command tier, Two officers from different species spoke in hushed tones. One, a crystalline lumen, noted that humans had an odd history, late arrivals to interstellar travel, yet with a staggering survival rate in hostile environments. The other, a scaled Dren trader, recounted an old rumor that human soldiers once camped for days inside a predator's den just to learn its patterns before killing it in its sleep. The lumen didn't know if it was true, but the image alone was enough to keep his voice low. The father asked for water, and when it arrived, he thanked the guard by name, having caught it during their brief exchange earlier. The guard stiffened, uneasy with how the human remembered. As he drank, the father began a slow monologue about rivers back home, how they'd rise in the spring, how the ice breaking upstream could change the current in minutes. "If you're standing in the wrong spot when it happens," he said, "you're gone before you even feel wet." The chief shifted in his seat. "You speak in riddles. I speak in warnings." The boy, meanwhile, was still explaining baseball. He described a double play in vivid detail, turning his hands in the air as if catching and throwing invisible balls. "You've got to be quick," he said. "And you've got to know what's coming before it comes." The caretaker nodded, charmed, missing the way the boy's eyes kept flicking toward the room's wall clock and the guard's comm unit. An hour into the questioning, the chief tried a different angle. "You could avoid execution if you admit this was an accident and agree to leave Valari space immediately." The father's expression didn't shift. "Accidents are when milk spills. This was intention." "Why?" "Because he touched my son." The bluntness left the chief silent for a beat too long. The father filled it with a smile so slight it barely touched his mouth. "And because sometimes the first move decides the whole game." The chief's lower limbs flexed beneath the table, a physical tell he probably didn't know humans could read. "You think you've made the first move here?" "I know I have." The statement hung between them like the weight of an unspoken verdict. Somewhere beyond the walls, the boy's voice drifted faintly through the ventilation system, still talking about games and home and Earth's long summers. "It's almost like they're playing a game, don't you think? A very dangerous game." Later, as they escorted the father back to a holding cell, two guards fell into step behind him. "Why didn't you fight?" one asked, more curious than mocking. The father glanced over his shoulder, his tone light. "Why do you assume I haven't started?" In the caretaker lounge, the boy finally set down his drink. He asked to go to the washroom, and when the caretaker waved him toward it, he walked the short hall with casual steps, passing within arm's reach of a comm panel. His fingers brushed the edge like an accident. A tiny green light flickered once and stayed lit. When he returned, the Avon asked if his father would be in trouble. The boy smiled, a small, precise thing. "Only if they're very lucky." Back in the holding corridor, the guards opened the door to a small, windowless cell. The father stepped inside, pausing just long enough to make eye contact with the security camera in the upper corner. His gaze wasn't hostile, just intent, like a man memorizing the pattern of stars in a sky he planned to fly through. The door shut with a final clang. Silence settled in the cell, broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation. The father sat on the narrow bench, elbows on his knees, and exhaled slowly, the way men do when they've confirmed their trap is almost ready to spring. "What do you think his trap is? And how is that little kid involved?" Far above in the command tier, the Lumen diplomat was saying quietly to the station commander, "You don't cage a human without first understanding why they let themselves be caged." In the caretaker lounge, the boy leaned back, tapping his fingers on the armrest in a rhythm that meant nothing to the Avon, but would be recognized instantly by the right set of ears. 3 short taps, 2 long, 3 short again, and somewhere deep in the station's maintenance ducts, a tiny relay came to life, passing that rhythm along. Word of the killing spread faster than the recycled air in the station could circulate. It seeped through markets and corridors, whispered between species and languages that needed no translation for the central fact. A human had crushed a Valari guard's skull in one move and done it without breaking his smile. By the time the story reached the higher decks, it had already mutated. Some claimed he'd done it with a weapon hidden in his palm. Others that he'd ripped the soldier's head clean off. But the part that no one could alter was the truth everyone felt in their bones. The act had been deliberate. In the holding cell, the father sat with the patient stillness of a man on a porch in the heat of summer, watching the horizon for a storm he already knew was coming. His posture didn't read as defiance, but neither did it speak of resignation. He had made himself comfortable in the unwelcoming space. Elbows on knees, fingers loosely laced, head tilted just enough to keep the camera in his periphery. He was definitely playing chess, not checkers, and the whole station was his board. Outside, the station's command tier buzzed with unease. Valari officers had arrived in force, their polished armor clanging in the docking bay like warning bells. Their commander, a broad-shouldered female with a deep scar across her crest, demanded the human be handed over for public reckoning. Her voice carried the tone of someone used to instant compliance, but this time it found resistance. The station commander, a silver-banded Lari with long, deliberate speech, hesitated. In the caretaker lounge, the boy sat cross-legged on the couch, turning a small bottle cap over and over in his fingers. The Avon caretaker had begun to suspect he was no ordinary child. He never fidgeted without purpose. He asked careful questions about the station's layout, masking them in talk about where the best food stalls might be. When told about the market's tiered structure, he'd smiled and said, "Good high ground is always better." The caretaker had laughed at the odd phrasing, but the boy's eyes had been dead serious. In the cell, the door slid open, and the security chief entered, his mandibles flexing in a rhythm that betrayed discomfort. "The Valari Guard will be here within the hour," he said. "If I were you, I'd prepare your final words." The father nodded slowly. "That's considerate. I've got one request before then." The chief bristled. "This is not a negotiation." "I'm not negotiating," the father replied, his tone mild. "I just want a meal with my son. You can post as many guards as you want." The chief stared at him, weighing the absurdity against some unspoken instinct. "And why would I grant that?" "Because the last thing you want," the father said, "is to have him remember that you kept us apart." The chief didn't answer, but the door shut again without locking. A sign the request was at least being considered. Up in the command tier, two alien officials were speaking in low tones, careful to keep their backs to the rest of the room. "Humans are not like the others," the Lumen diplomat murmured. "They smile too much when they should be afraid." The scaled Dren trader beside him adjusted the weight of his tail. "It's camouflage. On their home world, the predators show teeth before they kill. I think they've learned to do the same." The Lumen's crystalline fingers twitched faintly, the sound like glass wind chimes. "Then we are not seeing his face. We are seeing his warning. These guys are getting it, slowly but surely." Back in the lounge, the boy asked for a trip to the market before they were taken away. The Avon hesitated, then agreed, if only to ease what he assumed was the child's fear. They moved through the narrow aisles between food stalls. The boy's eyes moving faster than his head, counting guards, exits, cameras. He pointed at a rack of dried sea fruit, asked about the price, then let his fingers rest on the counter a moment too long. A tiny click sounded under his touch, unheard by the Avon, but enough to trigger a shift in a faraway ventilation shaft. The meal request was granted. In a small glass-walled room off the main security corridor, the father and son sat across from each other at a metal table. Two guards flanked the door, and a third stood behind the boy. The father broke the bread they'd been given, handed a piece across, and smiled faintly as his son recounted his market adventure in a tone that would have sounded idle to anyone else. To the father, the words carried precise coordinates and counts. 3 guards here, 2 drones there, a vent opening near the upper gantry. "They feed you well?" the father asked aloud. The boy shrugged. "Could use more salt." The father's mouth twitched. "Just once. We'll fix that soon enough." Above them in the observation deck, the security chief and the station commander watched. "He's not agitated," the commander noted. The chief's antenna shifted uneasily. "No, that's worse. This guy knows what's up." The boy asked if they'd be going home after this. The father's answer was a simple, "We'll be going somewhere." His tone left the guards uncertain whether to feel relieved or afraid. Later, as they were escorted back, father to his cell, boy to the caretaker, the father caught sight of a group of Valari soldiers through the corridor side viewport. They were boarding their flagship, their armor shining under dock lights, their movements sharp and certain. He watched them without changing pace, the barest glint in his eyes betraying the fact that he just memorized their formation. "What do you think he's planning with that information?" In the mess hall, a cluster of off-duty security officers debated in hushed voices. "He's baiting them," one said. He wants the Valkyrie to come here. Why? He's alone. Another replied. The first shook her head. You're still thinking of him as one man. Back in the cell, the father lay on the bench, staring at the ceiling. He began humming, a tune so ordinary, so unthreatening that the audio sensors barely noted it. But somewhere in the station's lower decks, a human engineer paused mid-task, listening. He hummed the next bar in answer, and the sound traveled on from mouth to mouth until it reached ears ready to act. The boy, back in the lounge, leaned close to the Avon caretaker. "When we leave," he said, "we'll take the long way. More to see." The caretaker agreed absently, not realizing the long way would pass 3 key junctions. Chapter 3. By the time the Valkyrie commander strode into the security corridor, the station's atmosphere was tight as a bowstring. She demanded the prisoner be brought to the docking bay immediately. The father stood when they told him, dusted off his sleeves as though preparing for a casual stroll. As they walked, his eyes traced every door, every vent, every shadow where a human-shaped form might wait. He was observing, always observing. At the docking bay, the great curve of the Valkyrie flagship loomed beyond the force field, its guns and armored plating a promise of violence. The father looked up at it for a long moment, the faintest curve of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The commander stepped forward, her voice loud enough to carry to the gathered crowd. "You will answer for the death of our soldier." The father's gaze slid to her with the ease of a man scanning a grocery list. "Oh, I've been answering for it since the moment it happened. You just haven't been listening." She bristled, ready to speak again, but he tilted his head toward the flagship. "Nice ship, big. Lots of blind spots in the upper turrets, though." Her eyes narrowed. "How would you—" The hum of the station's air systems deepened suddenly, almost imperceptibly, like a held breath before a plunge. The father's smile didn't widen, but it sharpened. "Because we've been here longer than you think." And in the silent instant before anyone could respond, the boy's voice carried faintly from somewhere behind the crowd. "Double play." The docking bay's air felt heavy, thick with the static of tension and the faint tang of fuel. The Valkyrie commander stood with her chin lifted, crest gleaming under the stark white lights. Her soldiers fanned out in precise formation. The human father was a quiet figure among them, unbound, but boxed in by the tight arc of armored bodies. His son was nowhere in sight, at least not to anyone who wasn't looking in the right places. The commander gestured toward the towering curve of her flagship. "You'll board now. Your trial will be before the Valkyrie High Court. The galaxy will see what happens to those who—" Her words cut off as the father's gaze shifted, just enough to draw her attention toward the upper gantry. Nothing moved there, but the stillness itself seemed unnatural, like a stage set moments before the curtain rose. "I've been on trial before," he said, his tone flat but not joyless. "Funny thing, those courts never quite outlast the people they try. You think you'll leave that ship alive? I know I won't be leaving alone." Some of the Valkyrie soldiers glanced at each other, small flickers of doubt in their disciplined faces. The commander's crest tightened. "You are nothing here, human. Alone. Surrounded." "That's what you see," he said. "I see friends in the walls, in the vents, on your ship." Before she could scoff, the station's hum shifted again, an almost imperceptible deepening of the background vibration that every long-term spacer learned to hear. The lighting dimmed for a fraction of a second. The Valkyrie soldiers straightened instinctively, hands twitching toward weapons. The father's voice carried in that charged pause. "You thought I was here by accident, that I let you separate me from my boy, but we don't do anything by accident." A sharp crackle erupted overhead and the docking bay's main blast doors sealed shut with a thundering finality. Around the perimeter, access panels slid open and figures emerged. Human men and women in plain clothes, stepping out of the walls like ghosts. Each one held something improvised but deadly, compact shock rifles, arc cutters, magnetic charges. The commander spun, shouting for her guards to form ranks. But the humans moved too quickly, slipping between them, cutting angles with the speed of people who had memorized the space long before the Valkyrie arrived. Across the bay, near a maintenance hatch, the boy appeared, escorted by a wiry woman in civilian leathers. He held a small device no larger than his palm. "High ground, Dad," he called, his voice steady. The father smiled once, brief, sharp, and moved. His hand shot to the nearest Valari soldier's weapon, twisting it free before the alien could react. In one fluid motion, he fired upward, shattering a security camera that had begun to record them. The shot was less about damage than timing, the signal for every human in the bay to move at once. Explosions of light and sound filled the docking bay. Not from lethal weapons, but from blinding strobes and concussive pulses designed to stun and disorient. The Valari formations wavered under the sensory assault, their lines breaking just enough for the humans to surge forward. The commander roared an order, but it was already too late. The father was in motion, using the chaos like a current to carry him forward. He closed the distance to her with a predator's precision, each step deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. She drew her blade, a long, serrated piece of alloy meant to intimidate as much as kill. He didn't flinch. "You came for me thinking I was prey," he said, sidestepping her first strike, his hand snapping out to grab her wrist, "but you walked into my hunting ground." She tried to wrench free, but his grip was iron. With a twist and a shove, he sent the blade clattering to the deck. His free hand came up, pressing a small flat disc against the chest plate of her armor. The light on it blinked red, then steady green. Her eyes widened. "What is this?" "Insurance," he said. "What a crazy dude. This guy really thought of everything, didn't he?" Behind them, the boy and his escort had already reached the control console for the docking clamps. Fingers flew over the panel, overriding safety locks, releasing the magnetic anchors that held the Valari flagship in place. Without docking control, the ship drifted just enough to disrupt its own internal security grid. Humans boarded through maintenance corridors and external airlocks, moving in coordinated silence. They weren't here to kill indiscriminately. Every action was surgical. Officers and command crew were secured first. Communications severed, weapons locked away. Within minutes, the Valari flagship's bridge was under human control. In the bay, the commander was breathing hard, her eyes darting between her scattered soldiers and the humans closing in. "You can't hold this ship," she spat. "Don't need to," the father said. "We just needed you here, now, without backup." You walked in carrying the head of the snake. From the flagship came a series of sharp, coded flashes through the docking windows. The boy glanced at his father and gave a small nod. The father released the commander's wrist but left the device on her chest. "Here's your choice," he said quietly, too low for the others to hear. "You go home and tell them the humans you think you understand aren't worth provoking. Or you stay, and my friends on your ship start making examples." Her jaw tightened. She looked around once more, taking in the hopelessness of the situation. Around the bay, Valari soldiers were disarmed but alive, corralled into tight groups. No bloodlust, no needless brutality, just control. "You're predators," she said finally, the words edged with reluctant respect. He didn't smile. "No, predators hunt for hunger. We hunt for survival. And we don't lose." He signaled with a tilt of his head. The humans began to withdraw, melting back into the maintenance corridors as quickly as they'd appeared. The boy jogged to his father's side, slipping the small device back into his pocket. "Time to go?" he asked. "Time to go." The commander stood frozen as they passed her, the device still warm against her armor. The implication of what it could do settling heavy in her mind. She didn't move to stop them. As the father and son stepped through the bay doors, the lighting returned to normal. The station's hum smoothing out into its usual rhythm. To anyone walking in now, it would have looked as if nothing had happened. But the Valari commander knew better. Everyone who had been here knew better. In the corridor beyond, the boy glanced up. "They'll come after us again, won't they?" The father's voice was low, certain. "Only if they forget what tonight felt like." They moved on without looking back, their footsteps unhurried, the echo of controlled violence still hanging in the air behind them. Somewhere in the docking bay, the device's green light blinked one last time. And with that, we have reached the end of the story, but stories don't end here. If you like the story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you receive all the new content. And if you have an opinion or something that caught your attention, leave a comment and let's discuss together. I'm waiting for your opinions, and see you in the next story. Bye.